All right, folks, we're going to get ready for our next session here, which is Kick Your Project Teams into High Gear with Office 365 Groups and Planners by Charles Appleseth of KSU. So welcome him aboard, and don't forget to put your comments in the SCED app when you're all done. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charles, and I'm from K-State. Today I'm going to be talking to you about some of the main features of Office 365 Groups and Planner. So one thing to be aware of before we get started is that I'm going to be doing something a little different in that this is not a how-to session. So what I'm going to be focusing on in this case are more along the lines of use cases. So what would you use these apps for? So this is coming from some of the things we've seen at K-State, which is how do we get buy-in from our customers on using these new products as we're releasing them. So I'm going to focus on a few ways that ITS has been using these products, and then also how academics can use those too. So these are things that can be taken back to those teams. That being said, when we get to the question and answer section, if you guys do have technical how-to questions, feel free to bring those up along the way. So with that being said, I'm going to hit a few of the high areas. So I'm not going to be showing anything at the moment, but one of the areas is email. So Groups is a collaborative tool that has several different features that combines them into a singular location, and these can be used in concert then for carrying out whatever tasks that you are looking at doing and facilitating group dynamics and collaboration. So one of those areas is email. So we all know about email, we know what it's for, we all use it daily. Why am I bringing this up? What is the point? In this case, Groups will do something that's relatively nice. So when you have your members added to your group, it automatically creates a distribution list for you. So this gives you a way to email all those people at once without having to go and make a contact list or something of that nature for the group. So again, that's a nice feature, but again, a lot of you are probably like, well, so what? I can do that easy enough anyway. Well, I'm going to ask another question, which is how many of you feel that you're getting more email than you can effectively manage in your inbox in any given day? Okay, I see hands all over the place waving strongly. So a nice feature here is that the group will use what's called conversations. So any email that is sent to and from the group will show up in this location. I don't have any at the moment in my demonstration group because I don't have any email in there, but you can find it all in this one place. So there are a couple things to know with that, which is that you can set it to where those email will also be delivered to people's inboxes, which is a common thing, so people are used to looking at that. However, you can also set it to where they're not. So what that means is if your group is committed to keeping inboxes down and trying to keep email searchable and findable, you can set it in that nature where you can access your email then in the group, which will keep it only group focused. So you don't necessarily have to look through the 200 other emails you got that day to find the one you're looking for. So that is a nice feature. One thing to know though, if you do have it set to where the email is delivered to other people's inboxes, is that there's a quirk to the system. So this is one of the technical things I will draw attention to. The sender of the email message does not get it to their inbox. So it is only the recipients. So we have had cases where somebody sent it out and then they send it out again because they didn't see it in their inbox, and then they send it out again. So this is something to be a little bit aware of. If you have that setting turned on, make sure to let your users know that the sender will not receive it in their inbox. So, since we had so much interest in how to minimize email, that is one of the things that you can do with a group as a whole. So right now I flipped over into the group notebook, and I want to talk about a couple different things. So why do we use email? Well, it's primarily to convey information to another party, so whether this is the email message, an attachment, whatever. By using a group, you can have that content in a non-email format, and it's all tied together. So the notebook is one area where you can do this. So this is basically just one note, but it's tied in. And one section I have in here is meeting facilitation. So a lot of us, when we have meetings, we like to make sure we have agendas, action items, things like this to make sure that the meeting is productive. Well, a consequence of that is that usually all that material gets emailed out. So at a minimum, you have 2 emails per meeting. So you have the email giving the agenda, and then you have the email afterwards saying what the action items were for. We have that same problem though. So at the time, it's nice to have that, but let's say that you're a couple weeks later and you want to find a specific email from that group. Well, then again, you have to dig through your email, try to find it, and need to know things like who actually sent it, to search, stuff of that nature. An alternative is to use the notebook function in the group. So here I just have some notes. I'm not going to necessarily read through all these, but this is talking about agenda items, action items, things of that nature. And what you can do is you can create a meetings note section in your notebook where you can then house these. So I've got a couple examples here. These are effectively fake meetings I created for the purpose of demonstration. And I built them around the Scrum Format for meetings. So Scrum Format has 3 basic questions, which are, what did we accomplish from the last meeting? What are we going to accomplish before the next meeting? And what are any roadblocks that might be in our way? So that is just a brief format of how you can organize meetings. In this case then, I have entries for dates that have exactly that content. So in this case, what I'm showing here, when I was creating this demonstration group, I pretended I was having a meeting with myself where I was telling myself what I was going to be doing. And so I started adding notes into what did I do in this group to create it for this presentation. So you'll note that when you use the notebook, it does have a date. So this is a nice feature. For meeting minutes and notes, one thing I was noticing that I was doing was going ahead and putting it in the title so that you could see it out here. So in this case, you can see I had 2 meetings on May 8th. But if we continued down the line, then we could find those. So this is a way to keep all those meeting notes together in one location and make it a little bit easier to find rather than digging through all your email again, looking through those notes. So that's one way to not only minimize email, but also make the content you're looking for more accessible. Another feature that you can use the notebook for is for training or conveying other information. So one of the sample plans I'm going to show in Planner is centered on event management. So this came from, I've been working with the K-State library staff on developing some content they were interested in, and they said, well, one thing we're looking for and want to use Planner for is event management. I said, okay, great, I can work up a sample thing, we can do that. As soon as I said that, and after I got out of the room, I realized I don't know anything about event management. That's not something I do. So, like most of us, I jumped out on Google, did a quick search, found 100,000 different ways to manage events. And I found one that was relatively simple, a 10-step plan. And it had a nice picture that I liked, and also an animated slideshow. So I went ahead and entered this into here to show what you can do. So you can identify your content, you can embed images, you can scale these, so pretty much anything that you can do in Word, you can do here. A nice feature too is that when you put in a URL, if you're linking something like a video, or in this case an animated slideshow, it automatically pulls that up right here in the note itself. So if we wanted to view this slideshow, we can click it right here. We don't have to actually go out to the website, mess around, all that. We can simply click through. If this is a YouTube video, we can start it and play it from here. So for developing training materials or anything of that nature, this is something that's a really nice feature. Another thing that's great for the notebook is if you have to give a presentation and you decide you're going to do something wonderful and not use PowerPoint, because everybody uses PowerPoint, and you're going to go out of the box and do a live demo. And then when you're at the conference, you realize, I don't have a splash screen with my title and my name. Well, you can go ahead and build it right in here, which is what I did here. So things to be aware of. We're going to move on then into Planner. Actually, one thing I do want to note is you notice as I've been clicking on these, I'm getting more tabs. This is something some people love and some people hate. So as you're going to the different sections of the group, they will open in a new tab. This is a feature that changed from when the groups were first rolled out. Originally, they just opened in a new window. And the problem I had there, and I am guessing several other users did too, was that let's say that you're out in Planner and then you wanted to quick look at something in the notebook and then go back. That wasn't as easy as it sounds. So as you're navigating back and forth, you're losing your place, getting into different areas. And I guess they got feedback on that. So now it opens up in different tabs. Personally, I like the tabs. However, as you just saw, if you're doing a lot of clicking around and not paying attention, by the end of the day, you might have 10 open tabs that you didn't realize you had. So that is something to just be aware of. So Planner is basically a lightweight planning tool. And I'm pulling it up here. So I've got a couple of example plans here. I'm realizing that my resolution has changed, so this is looking a little different. But what I wanted to accomplish here was you can talk about Planner and say, okay, this is to plan things out. You can put in tasks, you can assign people to them, and stuff of that nature. Everybody's like, great, okay. But again, how do I use it? So I wanted to get a couple use cases in here. So these are more of the example level, so they don't have as deep content as a real plan might have, but hopefully they will illustrate what you can do. As I mentioned before, one of the things I was asked to do was to provide some insight into event planning. So what I did was I went ahead and I used that 10-step guide that I had showed a little earlier, and I formed tasks. So in Planner's terminology, your plan or your project is referred to as a bucket. So each of these are buckets. This is the event one. And you create a bucket simply by saying add a new bucket. You can title it. And then each of these boxes that we see under the bucket, if I can speak, are our tasks. So we'll open one of these up. And there's a variety of things that you can do from within the task. You can house a lot of information in here. So it starts by what is the task. You can define what bucket it's in, so this is a way to move it from buckets, state what progress it is, when the start date is, when the due date is. You can assign it to people that are members of your group. You can have a description. You can actually build checklists into here. You can attach files. You can attach URLs, and you can put in comments. One final thing too is you have these nice little color tabs that pop out. I haven't found any documentation on what these are for. So what has K-State been using them for? One thing we found is that as long as you have a small team, you can assign a color to a person. So when you assign it, you can tag these then with that color tag, and at a glance, when the person's looking through the bucket, they can say, oh, all the blue ones are mine, all the red ones are Jim's, all the orange ones are Steve's. And so that's one way we're using them. However, so a lot of feedback that we hear is, okay, well, you can do a fair amount of stuff in here, but this isn't really conducive to something that requires a lot of notes. So you can add comments, and they'll just kind of stack up, but let's say that I need to really go into detail, list something out. What do I do? In that case, what I recommend is starting with a comment, but I recommend building a section in your notebook. So in the section, you can have your bucket's title. So in this case, it'd be event plan. And then for the page in the notebook, you can have the specific task. And then you can use the actual notebook for a more detailed way to journal what you're actually doing. So you have the comment as a placeholder to direct you to where the content that you're looking for is, and you have a way that you can get into deeper level content. Similarly, you can also use the group files feature, which I'll talk about a little bit later when we finish up here with Planner. So you see a couple of these look a little different. So this one looks very different than this. So what happened? In this case, when I created my task, I actually created a checklist. The other thing you can do here, so this is important to note, is show on card. If show on card is selected, then you will see it out here. So you can see then these boxes. A very important feature of Planner is that you can move all this stuff around. So when you're making your tasks for a bucket, if you get them all in the wrong order, you can just drag and drop them where you want. Same thing with the checklists that you can build into the tasks. Now, another new feature that rolled out sometime relatively recently is that originally in Planner, you could not take a task from one bucket and drag it to another plan. So this was something people didn't like. They said, well, you know, if I'm working on two things that are related, but I decide this particular aspect is something that should move to this plan, there wasn't any way to do it. Well, in another training session I was doing at K-State, somebody asked about that and I brought it up. So I usually will try to demonstrate the failure. And what I noticed was when I tried it, it worked. So this is one thing to be aware of too with Office 365 apps, is they're continually rolling out new features and things like that. That's another reason why I didn't want to do so much of a how-to on here, because tomorrow things could change. But I did want to draw attention to the fact that you can now move these tasks around between the buckets, because that's something that is useful, something that people have asked for. However, one limitation, at least for now, is a lot of people have asked and said, well, you know, one thing I'd like to do is create an example plan that I want to reuse. So I'd like to create this, copy it, then for the time that I'm going to put my real content in, and keep it as reference. At the moment, that is not something you're able to do. So I have been looking in the blogs and notes, and it is all over Microsoft's site that this is a feature people want. So hopefully at some point we will have that. One other of my example plans here, so this is something more along the academic line. So what is something a faculty member can use this for? So what I created here is an example plan of someone going through a sociology PhD program. So this is based on material from K-State, and it's something that in my past life before I went into IT, I actually was involved in grad school. And one of my complaints while I was in grad school is I felt that I didn't know exactly where I was going. So what did I need to be working on? One event that I had was I was told to start working on my actual dissertation. So I started writing it. Got a couple semesters in, and suddenly somebody asked me where I was at in progress for preparing for my exams. And realized, you know, you're supposed to do your exams first, not your dissertation. So I had to switch gears and do that. So looking back at that experience, one thing I would like to have is the plan laid out. So this plan, I contacted my old department, got a professor involved, and we started building out what this plan could be. So in this case, we're looking at a longer plan, minimum of 3 years, potentially 5 years, trying to document the main milestones that you would go through while completing an academic program. So the use case here would be if somebody is an advisor for a graduate student, they can build this plan together, work on it together, and cross these off. So once you are completed with a task for a plan, you can do this. You can say mark complete, and it disappeared. So it's not gone forever. It has moved down here to a hidden area that you can access by saying show complete. And now we see it struck out. So this is, as you're completing your tasks for your buckets, you can mark them off, they go away so they don't clutter up your view, but they are able to be found again. Also, if you made a mistake, said, oops, I actually wasn't done with that, you have an undo option, which will put it back. Another difference that we have in one of my example plans is on this one you see that I have these numbered. So this is not something that Planner does by default. However, it is something I might recommend as maybe a best practice. So one of the strengths of Planner is that you can move these tasks around. What I found though while I was coming up with this example content for this discussion was that when I moved something, I apparently wasn't being careful, and later when I looked, something else that I had in the correct position was now out of position. And it actually got a little frustrating because it happened more than once. So since there's no way to lock these tasks down at this time, one thing I would recommend is once you get these ordered the way you want, go back in and edit your task title and put a number in. That way, if it gets out of position, you can tell at a glance, hey, this one is now out of place. So for a longer plan like this PhD one, that might be more important because it would be really easy to get these steps mixed up accidentally. The other thing I want to show with regard to Planner is there's a different view. So this is the board view that we've been looking at. And you also have a chart view. So in the chart view, what this will do is it will show what the status of the various tasks for your buckets are by person. This is relatively uninteresting because I have not set dates for any of the example plans that I have set out. If I did, though, we would see different colors for, are these late? Are they in, so if they were started and marked in progress, are they in there? Are they completed? So at a glance, you can kind of tell where it's at. I did make some assignments to people so you can see who have however many different tasks assigned to them. Another feature is that you can see the tasks over here. This is something that I find mildly annoying in that this is all the tasks for your buckets and not necessarily in any order. So there are some ways to do some groupings. You can do who they're assigned to, due dates, things of that nature, or buckets. So I would recommend, if that's a feature you're looking for, check out the groupings feature. Another thing with Planner is you have the Planner Hub. And if you are in a lot of different groups, like I am, it gets very messy. So you see I'm in, I don't know, 30. So the most valuable thing you can do in here is that you can mark a plan as a favorite, and then it will move it to the top of the group. So that's a minor thing, but it is important if you have a lot of different plans. The next big section is the files section. So this is file storage for the group. It works very similarly to OneDrive, but there's a couple of things that I want to note with regard to it. This is a pet peeve I have, so I'm going to call Microsoft out on it and draw your attention to it so you don't fall into the trap. I just went into files. So you see I have a file in here. Looks good. This is the handbook that was referenced in my plan for the PhD program. So why is Charles angry? Well, if you go over to Browse Library, and this is how I would recommend you actually view your files in groups. You see we get a new tab, and what you see is there's actually a folder called Sociology PhD Program, which was my plan. So what that means is in the raw files view section, you might not necessarily see everything in there. So we've had customers complain and say, hey, I have files missing. So there are different types of files that don't seem to show for whatever reason in the files view, and some that do. Any folder structure you create, which is a great way, of course, to keep your content organized, doesn't show. So what you end up seeing in the plain files view is a random scattering of what different stuff you have in there. So that's something I want to draw attention to, because the first time I noticed that I had the same reaction that our customers do, which is, hey, I've got 10 files in here and I only see 3. What happened to my 7 other files? So another thing to note with regard to the files section is that unlike OneDrive, these are all fully editable by the members of the group. So in OneDrive, you can set files as view only or editable, and that's a nice feature for some things you're working on. Groups are built around the idea of collaboration. So even if you go in and say share a file from OneDrive to the group, which is a feature you can do, even if you've marked it as edit only, once it's in the group, people can get in and they can make changes. So just something to be aware of on that front. Another thing I'd like to note, so kind of jumping out from the specifics back to the general, is names. So When you create a group, you can make it either public or private. So what this means is if you have a group as public, anybody in your Office 365 tenant can join that group. So this would make sense for like some kind of advocacy group on campus, special interest group, things like that. So you want to join the anime club on campus, it might make sense to have that open to anyone that wants to join. In worst case scenarios, typically we want these private. So when you're creating the group, you'll get an option to select public or private, and that's something to kind of be aware of. One thing to note though, even if you mark it as private, there's aspects that can be seen. So the title of your group can be viewed by anyone in the tenant, and the membership of the group can be viewed by anyone in the tenant. So, for example, I am not a member of the ITS Directors group at K-State, which is a high-level group for our IT department, but I can see who those directors are, or at least who is in the group. So why I'm drawing attention to this is a couple things. If you have a title that is interesting, so usually people will label things close to what they're trying to accomplish, somebody might see that and say, hey, I'm interested in that, I want to join that. And so they can send an email to prompt a trigger to ask to join the group. If it's a public group, they'll automatically join. If it's a private group, what will happen is the owner or owners of the group will receive an email saying, this person is interested in joining, do you want to let them join? So I noticed this in a real case at K-State in that some of us in ITAC were creating a fake group just to test things out. And we called it ITAC Communications. Well, this sounds like something that might be a real group, and we promptly started getting requests from other ITAC members saying, hey, I think I should be in this group, I think you left me out. And then we had to explain, this is a fake testing group, you're welcome to join, but there's not any actual content for ITAC in there. So it's just something to be aware of, that you want to have relevant titles, but people can find them and they can request to join. Going to the question of owners, I would say a best practice is to have more than one owner for the group. So in my demonstration group, I probably don't have the best practice in that. Nope, I actually did. So the person who creates the group by default is the owner, but you can have up to 10 others. Best practice would be to have more than one. That way, if somebody that's in the group left the university, then the group doesn't die with them. So this is something we have seen at K-State where some student groups were created, someone graduated, then after the deprovisioning time period, students started saying, hey, we can't access these files anymore. And it's because they were tied to someone whose account was dead. So I would recommend having other owners. One final note is that a feature that originally wasn't in the groups that now is that you can have what are called guest users. So this means that you can have people that are outside of your tenant added by an email address. So for example, I'm from K-State, but I could add someone from here at Fort Hays into my group. Big thing to note there is that their user experience is going to be different than a tenant member. So this nice polished view that I have is not what they're going to get. They will receive an email invitation to the group, which is effectively their key to get into the group. So they can email the group through the conversations, and they have a portal basically into the files section and also the notebook section. They do not have access to Planner though. So if you are cross-collaborating with outside members, Planner is not a feature, at least at this time, that you can use with those members. So, one final note is your avatar button up here. This is where you can get in and make changes to your overall group. So, it opens up. These are the options that you receive when you first created a group, which we didn't see because I didn't create a group live. But let's say that I created it and I accidentally have my group public, but I wanted it private. This is how you would get in to change that status. You also have options like let people outside of the organization email the group. So if you want to let people send messages to your group, you can either turn that on or off. This is that setting I referred to about the turning copies on for inboxes. And most importantly, when you're done with a group, this is where you go to delete it. So we have about 15 minutes left, and I've gone through the main points I wanted to go through, so I'd like to go ahead and open the floor for any questions or comments. Okay, so the question was, if you're using this for projects, is there a team size that works best for this option? I haven't considered that question. One thing I would say based on how we're using it at K-State is smaller groups and projects that require smaller personnel tend to fit a little bit better with the way this is modeled, because it is a limited package, so you can only do so much in the actual planner application. But that being said, Microsoft has designed it to where it can be pretty much unlimited. So the answer they give to how many people can you have in a group is not a satisfying one. It just says over 1,000. Well, what is over 1,000? Is it 1,001? Is it 1,200? They don't clarify that. The other comment they do have in relation to group size is that the larger the group, you may start seeing some performance issues, like when you're opening the email conversations or the calendar, they may take longer to load. But I would say for the most part, in general, there seems to be a good fit with smaller groups, so say less than 15 or so, but realistically you could use it for any size that you would like.
I have a question. On the planner part, the due date, if you set a due date, do you get a notification that it's due?
That's an important question. I'm glad you brought it up because I meant to mention that and I didn't. So that is another area that people do complain about, in that when you set a due date in a task in Planner and even have it assigned to a person, it does not tie to their calendar. So one thing that people would like is, okay, I'm assigned this task, the due date is July 4th. I would like a calendar entry on there so I get my normal notifications. And again, at least at this time, that is not a feature that Planner has. So that is a limitation that is a point of frustration for current users.
How do you manage the group creation? Do you, like, the default then is leave it open, but do you guys have a request process, or how do you do that?
That's a good question. So the question was, how do we handle group management? So is there a request process, so if somebody wants to create a group or not? In the case of K-State, this is a feature that we originally did not have enabled, so nobody could create a group, and then we enabled it for everyone. So what this means is that anybody at K-State now, so whether they're active faculty, students, staff, whatever, so does exclude alumni members, they can create a group on their own with no restrictions. So that brings up questions like, okay, what if somebody creates a group with an offensive title or something like that? These were questions that K-State looked into, and we looked at some of our other systems that are open for user creation, and we haven't had that problem show up. So the decision was at this time to leave it open, allow self-policing, but if that were to occur, then we might need to start locking some things down.
You did have it show up, which was they actually shut it off. So that's what we're struggling with, I think, is how to deal with that. If I could follow up, what's your role? Are you in the administrative side, or you have the training side? I mean, who handles this at K-State is really what I'm asking.
That's also an excellent question. So the question was, who handles Office 365 at K-State, and what is my role? So I am with ITAC, which is the unit that faces with our customers. So we primarily deal in desktop support. We are the ones that people call when they say, hey, my Outlook is not syncing, it's whatever. But we also do a lot of other things in ITAC, which is we are involved in the testing of these applications, and we, at least at this time, are the primary knowledge base writers. So we test and we write how-to articles and things like that. We also train then our help desk. So the unit that I work with works directly with the customers is kind of tier 2, but ITAC also has tier 1. So calls and customers will come into our help desk and ask about this. So to the question of who the administrators are, That is something we've been working on nailing down a little better recently, because originally we didn't have these roles clearly defined. Right now, the role, depending on what is being asked, is kind of split between our identity management team and our enterprise server technology team. So in that regard, I am not an administrator. I do have some limited admin access, such as the admin console, where I can check license statuses and things like that. Yes. So the question was, in the Office 365 admin console, is there a way to look into group management? So can you tell if a group has been defunct for a while? What's its usage? That is something I honestly don't know the answer to. I don't have that deep a level access into the console. So one of our EST team might be able to answer that question. Unfortunately, I cannot answer that question at this time. Okay, well, we only had a couple minutes left, so it looks like we don't have any more questions. We'll go ahead and wrap up and give you a couple extra minutes. Thank you for your time today.